This is Jeff Mucci with RCR Wireless News, and we are delighted to have Rima Qureshi, who's Chief Strategy Officer with Ericsson today. Rima, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, last year in Stockholm at the 2014 Ericsson Business Innovation Forum, you talked about three initiatives. Number one, you wanted to focus on excelling in your core business. Number two, establish leadership in certain target areas. And number three, expand in new business areas by partnerships and alliances. I'd like to review today what progress you made against each of those. And why don't we start with the establishing leadership in some of these targeted areas, starting with IP.
Okay,
I'm actually going to share a slide here that might help us with the discussion.
I think that's a good idea. So yes, so let's talk specifically about IP, and I think we went through these slides during our Capital Markets Day, which took place earlier in November, and I think specifically on the IP side, we have launched the new Router 6000 series of products, and those will become available very soon into next year. And we've also launched the virtual router. If you may have noticed, there were also some other announcements beyond what we see on this slide, which, for example, is related to the announcement that we made on the next generation strategic alliance that we've now concluded with Cisco. So that partnership obviously goes much beyond what we are going to be doing in the IP space, but specifically if we talk about the IP space, we are going to be reselling the Cisco portfolio, which is the #1 portfolio on the IP side, and that will be a complement to what we have shown on this slide, which is what we are doing in the IP network space, closer to the RAN, more on the edge IP solutions, and that we will continue to do ourselves and then complement with the overall Cisco portfolio.
Well, as these mobile networks become all IP networks, we're doing two things. One, we're densifying the network at the edge, and we're also virtualizing elements. And we hear talk about basically a new type of network that's going to be an information-centric network. Can you talk about how these products, the Router 6000 or the Cisco partnership, kind of fits into the router and switching of video and content-centric traffic?
Well, I think that is the reason why we've decided that we will partner, because what we are trying to do is we are leveraging the strengths that we both bring to the partnership. Ericsson's very strong position in the edge as well as in the RAN. And what we see overall in terms of the networks that we have deployed globally on the increase of data traffic and the increase of video traffic. In the recent mobility report, I mean, the overall projections is that by 2020, more than 65% of all traffic is going to be video. But if you look at what we have already today in markets like the US, we already have more than 65% of the traffic being video, and a lot of that traffic going over mobile. So with that transition, and with the capabilities that you have with the Cisco installed base, as well as their #1 position on IP, the objective is really to take those two strong positions and create end-to-end solutions, not only for the requirements that we have today, but the requirements we will need for the 5G ecosystem, as well as the 5G use cases. One of them, which will be video, but there will obviously be a lot of other applications as well.
Got it. And maybe you could help us, when you look at routed traffic versus switch traffic in an information-centric network, what does that look like in the future?
I think the lines will become blurred about what is router traffic and what is switch traffic, what is IP traffic. But of course, those two networks will coexist for a certain period of time. And the objective that we have with the installed base, as well as the solutions that we are deploying, is that we will be looking for those solutions and combining the capabilities that we will have within our services, people, as well as the products that we bring, the software and the hardware. So our objective with what we can provide to the service providers is the ability to be able to leverage the install base, ensure that they are able to monetize it and keep it in the network as long as they need it. So then there will be a certain amount of traffic that will go over the switches. But then as you see more and more traffic being virtualized going over the IP network, you want to be able to leverage that capability as well. So we will also have the virtualized solutions. But the most important thing is the ability to manage that transition and to ensure that you manage that transition in a way to not lose the capabilities that we have worked very hard to build within a telecommunications network, at the same time as you take advantage of what the IP network can bring you.
Well, let's move on to the next area of focus in terms of your targeted areas, the cloud. Where does it fit into your strategy, and what are some of the recent developments that you've made in cloud?
Okay, so on the cloud side, we announced the HDS 8000, which is the hyperscale data center system in Barcelona earlier this year. We are very close to being able to deliver that. We already have that delivered with some of our initial customers. For example, with SK Telecom, we've got a partnership that we've announced, and we are working with them on the HDS 8000 solution. In addition to that, we have been working with companies like GuardTime and Mirantis on the strategic investment side, as well as on the partnership side, to provide security for the cloud, such as with the partnership that we have with GuardTime, as well as Mirantis being part of the overall solutions that we are deploying on cloud. And then, of course, we shouldn't forget what we announced last year with Apcera, which was a majority investment that we've done. So there's been a lot of development. There is continuing positioning and development as far as what happens in the cloud, in the telco space. The objective we have with cloud is we start with the installed base that we have in place, and we look at how we ensure the virtualization of that installed base. And beyond that, we look at how we move into cloud or IT cloud for the operator space. And then we will work with the operators to determine what is the best way to monetize and meet the requirements for enterprise, and how the operators will be able to play in that space. And then again, the requirements will be quite different depending on geography. What maybe a North American operator may need might be quite different depending on regulations on what will be required, say, for a European operator. So the opportunities and the positioning of the products and services will vary depending on the needs of the specific service provider.
Well, the migration to virtual elements and software-defined networks is going to be a transition process. Do you envision your cloud offering being an infrastructure as a service? Will it be a private cloud that you'll offer your carriers? Just help me understand how they would buy the cloud offering.
I think the cloud offering can be bought in many ways, but I mean, one of the things, of course, that we are doing with Apcera is the platform as a service. So that's above, if you will, the infrastructure as a service. We are not we do not have an intention to compete with the likes of AWS in the public cloud. That's not where we're going. Our objective is truly to look at how we need to virtualize for the sake of speed, efficiency, and cost, the telco network. So that's where we're focusing on specifically. And the way that the service providers can work with us is to buy products such as HDS 8000, or to look at using our platform as a service capabilities, or potentially what we are looking at is network as a service, as an area where we can go to in the future, where it may not be clear which is the best way to virtualize and which is the best way to take advantage of the installed base. That can be a full service offering, which would be a combination of our managed services capabilities, our products, as well as system integration and other types of services. And that would also leverage the install base of other providers, not only Ericsson. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on what the needs are of the operator.
So the HDS 8000, is it a hardware product or software, or a purely software product?
It's a hardware product, which obviously has software as well.
Yeah, and so they would buy that and put it in a data center that they own and run versus a data center that you own and run.
Exactly.
Okay.
But a data center that we own and run that they would then use is a possibility in the future, but not in the initial phases.
Okay. And what can you tell us about the SK Telecom partnership?
Well, at this point, they're in the process of looking at evaluating the HDS 8000 platform, and then we are working with them to work on their cloud strategy. So it's a partnership along the lines of what should an operator like SK Telecom do in the data center and in the cloud, specifically for their telco infrastructure, but also how they will be monetizing it.
Okay, well, let's move over to the BSS, OSS targeted area. Where were you last year, and what progress have you made this year?
Well, I think on the OSS BSS side, you could say that of the targeted areas, that's the one that is the most advanced or the most mature. We've been working with OSS BSS for quite a long time. We have a #1 position in the telco space in OSS BSS. We have strengthened that in the types of businesses that we have been doing. For example, the T-Mobile billing solution, where we have changed out Amdocs to replace it with a Telcordia solution. And we've got some other examples in Europe that we've done, as well as in Latin America, for example, in the Entel Digital telco transformation. In the case of OSS BSS, you could say that from a strategic investment and an acquisition perspective, we are in a good position because we have matured in this space quite a bit. So our objective is really to ensure that we are working with the operators to look at converged solutions between fixed and wireless. And we are looking at how we can transform their OSS BSS solutions to make them more agile, to be able to deliver solutions quicker, to ensure that the customer experience management is something that they can focus on to truly target the requirements that specific customers will have. That's going to be extremely important for the ability to differentiate and to be able to really truly address the needs of the subscribers. So those are the kinds of solutions that we're working on. And in the case of OSS BSS, as well as in all the other targeted areas, we're meeting our objective to grow faster than the market.
What are you seeing as some of the challenges in this digital transformation of an OSS system? Where are the hiccup areas, and how are you helping carriers overcome those challenges?
Well, I think the biggest challenge for any operator is this is like the heart and the brain of the network, and it is extremely difficult to be able to make changes and not impact the running smoothly of the network. But they need to be able to make these changes to the OSS BSS to allow them to be able to take advantage of the speed and efficiency that's needed for the solutions that they have to deploy in the future and to meet their customer requirements. It should not take months to be able to deploy a new solution or a new service, but that's the reality today. We need to be able to do it in days, if not hours, to be competitive. So that's the challenge that the operators face, that we're trying to work with them. And the challenge is to be able to do that without impacting the running of the day-to-day network. So how do you do brain surgery or heart surgery and not kill the patient at the same time? That's what we're trying to do. And so far, so good. But it's long, complicated projects.
And the OSS transformations, are you moving them to Ericsson's products, or are you transitioning them to a combination of Ericsson solutions and other partner solutions?
I think it's a combination, and it really is dependent on what the operators need. In the services space, whenever we are doing these types of solutions, they are always multi-vendor, and we provide the capabilities and the solutions that best suit the needs of the operators.
Well, things like provisioning and activation historically have fallen in an OSS type of bucket. When you think about provisioning and orchestrating scheduling of workloads in a virtualized environment, where does Ericsson start to put service activation and provisioning of a network or cloud resources?
It's part of what we have within the offerings within the OSS BSS space. So that's building capabilities to be able to do that within the OSS BSS suite that we already have, for example, the Ericsson Cloud Manager. You could say it's coming from two places, right? So if you look at the slide with the horizons, it's coming from the network down below.
Which one is that?
The one that you had is fine. So this one, basically what it shows is you need to be able to manage the elements, right? So in the core of the network, you've got the network element management, for example, for radio. So you're building that capability on top of your radio elements at the same time as you need to be able to build it on top with the OSS BSS capabilities. We're doing it in both places. But if you look at it purely from the perspective of managing the cloud, managing the overall network, providing multi-vendor management capabilities, that's being done through the OSS BSS suite. But then, of course, we need to be able to manage the cloud capabilities that we have as well. So, but we try to group that together in one architecture, one way of working within OSS BSS for all elements, including multi-vendor.
Got it. Well, let's move over to TV and media. Again, at last year's conference in Stockholm, you talked about TV and media being one of the most disrupted segments. And you had, I think, the Swedish television station, the public television stations, talking about how they've kind of disrupted their own business by starting to offer over-the-top services of their own.
Right.
Talk a little bit about what you've done in the area of TV and media over the last year.
Okay, so in the TV media space, we've done quite a bit in terms of recently announced, for example, the Media Room software suite of software that AT&T will be using. So that will be obviously for the new acquisitions that they have done to get more into the content space and to look at what they will be doing overall within TV. So we're going to be working very closely with AT&T, and that's a multi-year software agreement that we have with them. We have been doing broadcast services. For example, in the UK, we are responsible for play out pretty much of all of the content that you would see in the UK. And that agreement has been agreed. So we've got the BBC play out services that we are doing. And then, of course, we've got Channel 5, which we are also now going to be doing a multi-year broadcast service for. In addition to what you see here in terms of businesses that we have won recently in the TV and media space, we are also entering into the transition of compression, moving from hardware compression to software compression. So in the case of software compression, we've recently announced the intended acquisition of Invivio. And that's also to transition with the industry. If you go down, you transition from hardware compression in what we were doing with Tandberg to the software compression, which we will now be using the capabilities of Invivio.
And talk a bit about Invivio. Is it a core codec, or is it an edge codec, or is it actually a software client that would go on a device?
I believe it's a software client, but I would need to double check. I don't know the details.
Got it. Well, let's move into what I think is one of the most exciting areas. At least Gartner and others say it's $11 to $15 trillion impact on the global GNP, and that is the Internet of Everything, Internet of Things. You categorize it as industry and society. Talk a little bit about your IoT strategy for a minute.
Okay, so I think there are a lot of estimates out there on how big the industry is for industry and society, or Internet of Things. The Mobility Report estimates, based on the network traffic, that by 2021 we will actually have 27 billion connected devices, still towards our vision of 50 billion connected devices, and we are on our way. So that's growing at quite a fast pace, just as if you look from last year, we estimated 2020 to be about 26 billion, and now we're moving it up to 27 billion in a year. So a lot of developments already going on in terms of alliances, in terms of announcements, and then of course a lot of work that's going on specifically in different verticals. For example, in shipping, we'd already announced in the past the work that we have been doing with Maersk. Now we are announcing what we worked on is the maritime cloud. So not only a solution specifically for one company, but how can you provide a solution for the shipping industry overall in a cloud environment? We've got smart metering solutions, for example, in Norway, and a lot of work that we are doing with connecting things and making them part of the overall environment. So can you get capabilities for connectivity as you are waiting for a bus, as an example? So the connected bus stop. Or as you see in certain environments where you just have the capability of Wi-Fi, as an example. So these are the types of solutions that we are creating specifically for cities or urban environments, and then beyond that for particular verticals. And of course, our objective long-term is that not only should we be looking for solutions in particular verticals, because I think that's not where you truly take advantage of the disruption and the efficiencies you can create, is really by looking at the solutions, as you see on this slide, that you create across industries. And that's truly where you will see the benefits coming from Internet of Things, is that if you have a common device connection platform, which we do, or if you have a common OSS BSS platform, which we do with our capabilities, plus what we acquired with Metrotech, that gives you the ability to create solutions that maybe allow you to leverage offerings across verticals. So that's what we're trying to show on this slide, is that we've got the individual offerings in each vertical, and then the offerings that you can take that allow you to work across more than one vertical.
Do you see, actually, I think Ericsson announced last week or the week before, and we interviewed one of your product managers this week, the IoT trial you're doing with Orange, with their LTE and GSM, and then separately Orange announced that they were going to do a trial with LoRa.
Right.
I'm just kind of curious, how do you see carriers picking and choosing how to work with Ericsson on this, using this chart as an example?
It again depends on what positions the operators are taking overall. We use a slide when we discuss the operator landscape of segmentation that the operators are doing. And actually, I think it is in this pack, if you go further up. That one. So the operators are segmenting themselves depending on what type of role they would like to play. Are they going to be a network developer? So the most important thing for them is the quality of their network or the price that they will charge on their network. So we have specific types of offerings we would give to them more on the connectivity layer, for example, the device connection platform. Or are they a service enabler, which means that they allow others to develop solutions on top of their network? And then there is a different set of offerings that go a little bit further up the stack on the slide that you had previously. Or are they a service creator, meaning that they are going to be the ones responsible for the content of what they're going to be doing? So the offerings that we have to the operators, and including the services associated with those offerings, really depend on where they position themselves. And what we see is that the operators are really 40% network, 40% service enabler, and about 20% service creator.
Got it. Well, earlier this week, you were quoted in the Dallas Morning News as having, as being in a position, Ericsson, as being in a position to accelerate smart city and smart transportation projects. Can you talk about where Ericsson would fit into a smart transportation and smart city a solution? Are you working through the carrier? Are you working through the city directly? And then how does that roll, how does that service roll itself out?
I think it's going to be a combination, and take specifically the case of a city, any city. The objective is really what can you do specifically to address the requirements that they may have in the transportation space, in public safety space, in the utility space as examples. And those are the reasons why we've targeted specifically those three verticals to begin with in our industry and society offerings. So it wouldn't be that we address the city as a whole necessarily. We would probably go and look at these specific verticals and what problems or what issues are they trying to address that they may have on traffic management or on efficiencies in terms of running of buses. There could be all sorts of solutions related to transport that we can have discussions with either the responsible for transportation or the overall city. Related to utilities, there's a lot of solutions on smart meters, efficiency, smart grid type solutions. And then on public safety, emergency response, security, lots of offerings that would address specifically the blue light, as we call it, services.
Are cities getting it? I mean, are they understanding the economic impact and the transformative nature of having robust connectivity available in a market as really an economic driver and a job driver?
I think the cities are getting it. I think the challenge that we have is not specific to cities, is the business model and the value chain, which we all as an industry need to work through, because the people that benefit from these smart city solutions are not necessarily the ones that are paying for it. That's the challenge that we have to work through. And we've had these discussions with AT&T as part of our AT&T Drive Studio initiative that we have, for example. The people that benefit from the solutions are not necessarily the ones that pay. So what is the business model that we put in place to ensure that those that pay are sharing in somewhat of the revenue? In the case of cities, it's similar. But in some respects, you could say the cities have the responsibility to take care of this on behalf of their citizens. In some cases, that makes the situation easier to be able to deploy the transport solutions or the utility solutions. But that's what we need to work through overall as an industry, and it involves public-private discussions as well on who benefits. So we are getting it. It is complex. It's an ecosystem question, and I think we will have to work through it case by case.
Well, in terms of getting down to the specifics, kind of the grassroots level, 2 years ago at Mobile World Congress, your CEO was there with the CEO of Philips, and you're talking about these integrated street lamps, LED lamps that would reduce energy costs, but they have the radio elements built into them. And then a couple weeks ago, there was an announcement in Los Angeles about a couple hundred street lamps going in, and I think there's another one going on today. Talk about Ericsson's specific role in that particular offering.
I think that's probably something that would be good to follow up with Glenn, but I'll give you my viewpoint, and that's that it's those kind of solutions that I think address a lot of the needs that we would see within a city environment. One, which is coverage and capacity, which you can address at the same time as you address the municipal requirements of how many base stations are you putting up, and do you have the licenses and the leases to be able to create these base stations wherever you need them, the towers wherever you may require them. So a solution like what we are offering with the smart light pole addresses the need of where we need to go with 5G, as well as where we also have to go with 4G. So you've got basic coverage, but then during a day, it's amazing how much traffic shifts from one location to another. So there's only so much you can do in the macro network. So of course you're going to ensure coverage if you are an operator in the macro network. You are going to supplement it, which we are now beginning to do with the operators and enterprises indoor. But beyond that, in a day, depending on what time of day it is, you have people congregating in different places that are requiring use of the network, which means that you need to be able to supplement it in dense environments. And you need to be able to supplement it in dense environments in such a way that it is not obtrusive or an eyesore or potentially other requirements that the municipalities may have. So the connected light pole is one way of being able to accomplish that.
Got it.
The light pole was there anyway.
Can you talk a little bit about, I've got the slide up that has partnerships with Vermeer, Ditch Witch, and then Ambient. Can you talk a little bit about where they fit into the industry and society plan, as well as ability to deploy those dense resources and fiber to the light post and buildings and that sort of thing? Okay.
Vermeer and Ditch Witch are not specific to industry and society.
Okay.
So those are things specifically that we are doing for fiber rollout, as an example. Mm-hmm. So those are in the network rollout space. So that's part of the core offerings. And again, it's to leverage the capabilities of other companies where we don't believe it's core to our business. So we will partner with the people that have the expertise on this. So of course, if there is going to be a lot of fiber rollout, as an example, and we are going to be involved either as a prime integrator, then we want to be able to enlist the capabilities of a company such as Ditch Witch, who would have that as part of their expertise.
Got it. And then ambient, where does it fit into your IoT strategy?
Ambient is part of the overall solutions that we are looking at for the connected cloud capabilities that you will need for IoT.
Got it.
So, that's an acquisition that we did earlier this year, and that overall fills the gaps that we have within the industry and society space.
Well, next, I'd like to talk a little bit about DevOps and this connecting of the IT world with the network world. And there, in 2012, there was a Stanford report on virtualization. There were a couple key quotes in there that really jumped out at me, and I'll quote them as saying, in 10 years, you're not going to have highly skilled, highly paid people working with the network. Working with network hardware, you're basically going to take the power out of the hands of companies like Cisco, Juniper, et cetera, and put it in the software world. And then the final quote was by Rackspace CTO, and he says they, being a company called Nicira, put the power in the hands of the cloud architect versus the network architect. So, you've got this kind of tightened battle between the traditional network folks versus the hyperscale cloud folks. What role does Ericsson see themselves playing in connecting the dots and creating a unified DevOps community?
So I think it's a very good question. I think Ericsson plays a very important role because Ericsson is very strong network capabilities, whether that be on the hardware side or on the software side or specifically on the services side. So in the type of environment that you describe, first of all, I don't believe it will happen as quickly as was stated there. We're definitely going to need hardware, and we're going to see hardware, whether it be white boxes or very, very specific hardware, for quite a while to come. It might be smaller, but it will still be there. And what you're going to be able to need is even more so the ability to make sure that it all works well together. The last thing that you want to do as a service provider is to move your hardware cost into operating cost or into system integration cost. And that's the risk that you face unless you are looking at what truly is the best solution, not just removing a hardware element and replacing it with a white box. Sometimes it is much more efficient to have a proprietary system. Because it saves you costs that you would then incur on the OPEX side. So what Ericsson provides in this environment, of course we're working with hardware, we'll continue to work with hardware, we're going to work with services, and we're going to work with software. And of course we are working in the DevOps model, and we will continue to work the more traditional R&D model and standardization and all of that. So where Ericsson comes in is to help the operator make this transition and help the operator determine where is the right place to go with standardized proprietary hardware and where it makes sense to use more of a white box DevOps model, given that we are network experts.
Well, I think along those lines, I've got this, I just put up another chart that starts to show the different layers of IP transport. And you could also say there's RAN in there, and you got the applications and core, but the key area is really command and control and orchestration of all those resources. Maybe talk a minute about this slide as it relates to connecting the dots between the cloud world and the network world.
So the cloud world and the network world is going to coexist, obviously. And of course, the lines are going to blur as we move along, but they are going to coexist for quite a while. And what you need more and more is to be able to manage these and to control these in a way that works truly across. Because today what you have is each one of these elements having their own individual proprietary software, as well as maybe potentially customized software on top of it, and then solutions that might span the radio access network, but not maybe go into the core. So you need to have the capability to be able to manage those all the way across, and not only for one provider, such as Ericsson, but multi-vendor. So management and control becomes extremely important. That's why we've got OSS BSS as a targeted area, and we are number one in this space, and our objective is really to take it to the next level, to include the cloud capabilities, the virtualization capabilities, and what becomes extremely important in 5G, which is the ability to manage and control the network depending on what type of use case you have on 5G. If it's a farm use case where you're going to need to make sure that you have some sort of connected device that needs to live in the network for 10 years, and you need to make sure you don't use too much battery life, the way you run that in the network is going to be very different than a video application or remote surgery, which we use as an example, or driverless cars as an example. So all of that needs to be done through the management and control of the network. Extremely important, more and more so going forward.
Well, along these same lines, you should talk about the horizontal layer from the cloud to the RAN. It's going to be increasingly challenging for carriers to manage the quality of service and the quality of experience and the SLA across the entire network. What role does Ericsson see themselves playing in terms of offering service level guarantees and portals to help the enterprise customers and the carriers really manage the quality of service across that entire complex network?
Well, I mean, we already have the requirements that we have been living with for years, for decades, I can say, in the telco network of 5 nines. And all of the solutions that we provide continue to meet the telco requirements. What becomes challenging is obviously when you get the IT convergence into the telecommunications industry, how do you ensure those capabilities also mesh with what we have done traditionally within the telco environment? And we want to ensure that we continue to provide those telco-like capabilities across the overall network. And we provide that obviously for all of our products, and we will continue to do so. And then when we are providing managed services, of course, we are providing service level agreements, and we are agreeing on those with the operators. And then we commit to meeting those service level agreements depending on what the requirements are for the specific contract and the operator. And that's then not only for our products, but also multi-vendor.
Okay, well, we've got 2 minutes left. Let's close by talking about the requirements and challenges for 5G, specifically the role of silicon and some of the advances in silicon that have to take place to meet these increased processing requirements.
Well, I think there's going to be requirements all through the network as we move towards 5G. And of course, we've heard a lot of announcements about pre-5G. And there's a lot of work going on within the World Radio Council, as well as in pre-5G trials, as well as what we are doing with our own test bed. So I think the advancements are all across the network. It will be on the spectrum that will be needed. It will be along the standardization we need to do, and the standardization will be quite different this time because it's not only the traditional players, there's a lot of new players that come into play. And of course, it's on the silicon, it's on the devices, it's everything. The important thing to keep in mind as far as 5G is concerned, it's an evolution that we would like to see. So we are going to try to leverage as much as possible the installed base. And the other important thing is we talk about the network society. 5G will be the generation of the network society is what we say, meaning it will not only about how much more quickly you can download a movie. It will be about whether you are driving a driverless car, or you're in a driverless car, or whether you are making sure that you preserve the battery life. So depending on the use case, the needs of the network will be very different, and we need to be able to make sure that we create a network that allows us to do that. So that's the concept of slices that allows you to toggle your performance requirements depending on what the use case is.
Rima, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.